Good morning, everybody. I'm sure that a lot of you saw Eric Cozy in one of his videos talk about the fact that the court system is clogged up by people who shouldn't really be going to court to try and get off with things that they are responsible for. Now, many years ago, I got hooked on Speedway. Speedway in the UK is motorbike dirt track racing, and I got to meet one or two of the interesting characters that are involved in Speedway. One in particular that I was very friendly with, and on one occasion he was discussing what job I did, and when I told him how I travelled around the borders giving music lessons, he asked me what sort of car I'd got, and it was a sort of a basic runaround that I had, and he said that if it was him, being a Speedway rider, he would get the fastest car he possibly could to save time going from A to B, and I've taken that on board, and I must admit I've always had a what one would call a performance car since. So, not surprisingly, a few years back, I got a letter through the post from the police to say that I had been doing 42 miles an hour in a 30 mile an hour zone, and that I was to confirm who the driver was and send their form back. But when I checked on the date and the time, the date was the date that I was doing a gig, and the actual time of day was at night. It was 20 past 11 at night. As I say, I was doing a gig that night, sort of 25 miles away, and the gig wouldn't have finished, and I didn't drop the keyboard player off till about 11:30. So the police had made a mistake by an hour of what time I was in Galashiels, and it turned out that it wasn't obviously the fast car that I'd got that night. It was my what the Americans would call a station wagon, which is an estate car because it had all the band equipment in it. So I immediately went to my solicitor down in Hoyk, very nice fella, and he said, well, I'll get in touch with the police because the main police station is in Hoyk, and I'll check and see if they've got a photo, and it transpired that they didn't have a photo. It was just two officers with a radar gun making a note of registration numbers as they went past. So I left it in his hands. About a month later, I got two policemen knocking on the door, telling me that, you're in big trouble. You were speeding and you haven't provided the information on the form. And I pointed out to them, well, the form says who was driving the vehicle at 20 past 11 in Galashiels. And I said, well, I wasn't driving the vehicle in Galashiels at 20 past 11. It was on its way to the keyboard player's house in Peebles. So how, if I'd have filled in that form, I'd have been lying because it wouldn't have been accurate. So anyway, the case went to court, and I brought along as my witness the keyboard player who testified that I had indeed dropped him off around about 11:30, and also a letter from the hotel to confirm that I had been playing at the hotel that night. They couldn't actually confirm what time the gig finished and what time I left, obviously, but they confirmed that I was there. So basically, in summing up, the sheriff, because that's what they are here in Scotland, they're sheriffs. In summing up, he said that he still believed both sides. The police saying that I had driven the car at 20 past 11 in Galashiels, and me providing witnesses that I couldn't possibly have been there. But the sheriff, as I say, he still said that he had to believe the police. Obviously, the case was dismissed, and there was no repercussions. I got off both charges, A, of speeding, and B, of not providing them with the information that they wanted. Now, one of my pupils is a retired police constable, and he served for over 30 years. Very nice fella. He never, in his years as a police officer, although he was very senior to some of them, never ever accepted promotion. He never wanted to go above constable. Why? He just didn't want the hassle. Which brings me on to James Lenk. Now, although obviously what he did was pretty terrible, you have to admire his coolness. I do have to give him that. Well, let's put it this way. For me, he is far more competent than the likes of Tom Kosuric and Gene Couchet and Kenneth Peterson and Robert Herman. He is far more competent. You can't help thinking that if he had wanted to run for sheriff, he would have got the support of a lot of people. Remember that when he gets asked, would it have been unfair on Steve? And he simply said, batted it back with a straight back and just said no. Very, very cool. I must admit, I admire that kind of calmness, which, as I say, some of the others have not displayed. Kratz at times gets quite annoyed because he wants to play the game his way. And Dean and Jerry are not falling into his trap. His trap is to simply ask his witnesses simple questions to which they can answer yes or no, and then when Dean and Jerry ask simple questions, they can just say yes or no or deny, and it was just going to be a case of, did you plant the key? And Andy Colburn says, definitely not. Lenk, did you plant the key? They weren't going to play that game. That's what Kratz wanted them to do, but they weren't falling into that trap. And at times did get quite annoyed with them, wanting to know when they were going to ask questions such as that. And of course they didn't. They implied. Because, as I say, when it comes to the police, you cannot harass and harangue them too much in a court. The judges, the public, they do not like. As I say, the judge, in my case, he could not turn against the police and simply say, it's obvious you've got this wrong. He had to say, I believe both sides, which was obviously a bit of a cop-out. As I say, it's obvious that Andy Colburn dropped the key and that Jim Lenk discovered it. And I think the running for sheriff was the fact that Jim Lenk wanted to have a lot of control, and the best way he saw of doing it would be to be a little bit like Jeff and just remain as a constable. He just wanted to remain as a lieutenant without the hassle, but he knew that his boy was in charge, and that's why he gave him his backing. And they, as I say, they absolutely looked after one another. They were definitely thick as thieves. So as I say, for Lenk, it was a bit of insurance. Promote Andy. I mean, there's a hierarchy for Andy Colburn to jump from just a sergeant, past the lieutenants and the detectives and the undersheriffs, to go right up to sheriff. You have to think that's quite a promotion, isn't it? Finally, the interesting thing is that, as you know, the cabinet was not brought into court. Why? Because Kratz knew that would have been a complete and utter disaster to have had the cabinet there. And I must admit, he did trick Dean and Jerry, because they thought the cabinet was going to be there because the key was there. And of course they didn't bring the cabinet in, and you hear Jerry say they didn't bring it in. Well, I believe I'm right in saying that Dean and Jerry could have asked for that cabinet to have been in. I'm not sure, but I suspect that is the case. And as Steve pointed out in his letter complaining about the performance of Dean and Jerry, that a simple reenactment would have completely blown the cleverly hidden key out the water. That's all I really want to say for now. So this is the third and final part. I'm sorry it's been in such small doses, but I've only got a simple iPhone, and apparently when I go much over the 10-minute mark, it won't allow me to upload to YouTube. So I'm not going to go for fancy video editing stuff like Ericozy. I'll just stick to a nice simple video. As I say, bye for now, and thank you everybody for commenting and watching the videos, and well, stay tuned and I'll have many more ties for you to look at. Bye for now.